Good morning, church. A few weeks back, I talked about Israel's defeat at Ai. This is a story that takes place in the book of Joshua, and the thing I looked at in particular was Joshua's response to this loss. Israel ended up being soundly defeated by a relatively small army because God had pulled his hand off of Israel. Why did God do this? It was because there was a sin in the camp. Israel had done something that they were told not to do. Joshua ends up dealing with this sin. God restores his hand upon Israel, and Ai is then totally defeated. I want to go back and look at a few things in relation to this story, and then look at the outcome of Israel's victory over Ai and see how it applies to us today. First, let's backtrack to what the Israelites were told prior to the walls of Jericho falling down. In Joshua chapter 6, verses 18 through 19, we see that the people are not to take anything for themselves. Everything except for items made of silver, gold, bronze, and iron are to be destroyed. Those things that were made of silver, gold, bronze, and iron, they are to be put in the Lord's treasury. Again, nothing was to go to the people. Second, we see that the sin in the camp is Achan's violation of this order. In Joshua chapter 7, verse 20, we see that Achan ended up keeping a beautiful robe, 200 silver coins, and a bar of gold from himself, from Jericho. Achan ends up confessing to this sin, and he pays the price for this sin. He actually knew what the penalty would be, and he actually did it anyway. In the last verse of chapter 7, it says that justice was done and that God was no longer angry with Israel. Third, before the second battle of Ai, God tells Joshua that this time the people will be allowed to keep the plunder from the battle. At Jericho, God said, "No, the spoils are mine. They're not for you." But here, he says the spoils are yours. Enjoy. Fourth, we see that when Israel attacks Ai for the second time, after the sin had been dealt with, God gives them the victory. Sin had been justly dealt with, and Israel wins. As a side note, the battle at Ai is particularly interesting if you like military strategy, so if you do, I would suggest going to check out that story for yourself. Anyway, back to the point of this devotional. I want to go to the point that after the battle itself. As God had promised, he said, "I will give you the spoils after this battle." God does. Israel is allowed to keep the treasures and the livestock. Achan, after the battle of Jericho, when he saw that there was a beautiful robe there was silver and there was gold, he said, "I don't care what God says, I want it," and so he took it. Now, unbeknownst to Achan, if he would have waited, most likely he would have ended up with that which he stole from God. If he would have waited until after the battle of Ai, God would have said, "The spoils are yours," and Achan could have had what he wanted. Achan did not wait for God's timing, which was after the defeat of Ai, and he paid for it. The rest of Israel, on the other hand, they waited and they were rewarded. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that this is prescriptive of all moments in our life when we see something and we want it. I may want a new truck, but that's no guarantee that God will give one to me. However, I think we can learn an important truth from this story, the story of what happens after Israel defeats Ai. And the truth is this: if God says no, as he did at Jericho, we must accept it, and maybe in due time he will give it to you. Achan could have had the silver and gold if he would have only obeyed. God does not withhold out of some sadistic pleasure, but out of his own goodness towards us and for his glory. My good, and even the good of those around me, is found in what God calls for. If I go against God, then I'm not merely going against God, I'm actually going against myself, and I'm even harming those who are connected to me. I'd like us to remember the words of Paul in Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, when he says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." I'll be praying for you. Please pray for me, and Lord willing, I'll see you next week.